Okay, there we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Dan Gotsagen. I am a commissioner, I guess is what we call us folks, on the Heartland Conservation Commission, and uh, welcoming you to this presentation by Hannah Dallas, who is the Southern Windsor County Forester for our area. Hannah gave a presentation about a year ago for the Conservation Commission. Hold on, there's somebody here to admit. For the Conservation Commission on the emerald ash borer. And she has some updated information for us that she'll share today. Um, After we are recording this presentation, so everybody should know that in advance. After we are done with this presentation, we will be uploading it and it will be available to see both on the Heartland Town YouTube channel, and we will provide links to that both on the Heartland website, we're on the Conservation Commission page, and also Anderegg will be posting a link to that uh, on the Heartland listserv. So I'm sure some of you will have questions, and if you do have questions, we are going to ask you to save those until the end of the presentation, or you can put them in the chat and Hannah will address any of your questions then. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor over to Hannah Dallas.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I am the county forester. I cover Southern Windsor. I also cover Grafton and Rockingham and Windham County now. And so I'm here, as stated already, to talk about EAB, Emerald Ash Borer, give some updates, and then answer any questions. So a brief introduction. We'll cover what is Emerald Ash Borer, ash tree ID, Emerald Ash Borer infestation ID. So how do you tell if a tree has Emerald Ash Borer? Slow the spread of Emerald Ash Borer in Vermont, and specifically our region of Vermont. Where is it? Ash across Vermont, and then talk a little bit about what can private property owners do with their ash trees, and some resources for you all, and then answer questions. So what is Emerald Ash Borer and how do you identify it? Emerald Ash Borer is an invasive insect. It is most impactful to our trees when it is in the larva stage, but there's also a beetle that does munch on ash tree leaves and is also the thing flying around, moving, and depositing those larvae in the ash trees. So its life cycle, similar to a lot of beetles, is they will lay eggs. These beetles lay eggs in the bark of ash trees. After those eggs hatch, they're in the larva stage, and while they're in the larva stage, they are eating their way through the living part of the tree, the cambium layer. So that's the layer just below the bark. And they are eventually, when the populations get high enough, girdling that tree. Girdling means they are cutting off water and nutrients flow for that tree. So that tree cannot move that water and nutrients up and down, and therefore dies if it gets bad enough. So the larvae are munching around inside the cambium layer, and then when they pupate, they exit the bark with a D-shaped exit hole, and they are the beautiful emerald green color beetle. They're about 1/2 inch long, and they will fly about 1 to 2 miles a year in that adult stage. So there's some lookalikes. I think most often people confuse emerald ash borer with either the bronze birch borer, because it's a very similar shape, or with the six-spotted tiger beetle, because the six-spotted tiger beetles are really eye-catching green color, and they're often in fields where people are noticing a downed ash tree or a tree that's fallen into the field or a landing, and they catch people's eye because they're really bright green color. So what is ash and how to identify it? Ash is the only host species for emerald ash borer. So that means emerald ash borer will only eat ash trees. And we in Vermont have 3 different species of ash trees. We have white ash, we have green ash, and black ash. There are most of our forests have white ash. That's sort of an upland northern hardwood species in the mix with maples and birches. Then we have green ash, which is in sort of lowland areas or often planted in urban areas. And then we have black ash, which is not found very widely distributed, but where it is, it's in really high concentrations. So it's in forested wetlands. And there are a few ways here to identify the different kinds of ash. This time of year, while the leaves are turned, or they just turned and fell off, white ash you can really distinguish from the other 2 ashes, because the leaves, instead of turning yellow like the other 2, they turn purple in the fall. So it's this really beautiful burgundy purple color. You can also use some bud identification or leaf identification to divide the ash up. But all that's to say, they are all susceptible to emerald ash borer. Black ash is the most susceptible to emerald ash borer. So these trees are, especially white ash that we're going to see most, they're a large tree. They don't branch very low when they're a mature tree. So their branches, you'll have a very clean stem, and then they will branch up, so at 60 to 80 feet tall. You'll get a nice big crown on them. They have very stout twigs because they have a compound leaf, and any compound leaf is on a stouter twig to support that larger leaf. That compound leaf, it means that there is a leaflets on a single leaf. Let's see. So the bark is sort of this ashy gray color with furrows that sort of interlock and move up and down the tree. The leaf is opposite. And then these trees are dioecious. So there are female flowers on some trees and male flowers on other trees. And there is a one-winged samara that you'll find on the female trees. So emerald ash borer infestation of an ash tree, I talked a little bit about this, but how do we know that an ash tree is infested with emerald ash borer? And what does that look like once it's infested? So an ash tree, prior to emerald ash borer being in the area, had no non-native pests. It does have some native pests, but they're not at levels that they're solely responsible for the mortality of that tree. They might come in as a secondary factor if that tree is stressed, or you get a lot of root damage on the tree, and then they're coming into those stressed trees. But emerald ash borer will infest perfectly healthy live trees and eventually kill them. So it starts with just a pretty mild infestation of a few beetles. And you can see this really great picture of the decline of a tree here. So really big, healthy crown. You probably don't notice much in years 1, 2, 3. And then the population is going to build and build. And eventually, as you see on the right-hand side, under that bark, the cambium layer is just completely infested. And there's also a lot of adults munching on the leaves in the upper canopy. And that tree, as it is more and more stressed by the lack of nutrients and responding to that insect, is going to shrink its crown, and then it's also going to stress response with epicormic sprouting or sprouting from the base of the tree. So one of the first signs, and I really find this to be the best telltale sign of emerald ash borer, is to look for this woodpecker flecking. So woodpeckers are searching in all of our trees everywhere for native and invasive insects. They feed on larvae under the bark of a lot of trees. And they are going to key in on the fact that this ash tree has larvae under the bark. They can hear it. They, I think, are attracted by maybe some pheromones, but they know that there's larvae under there, and they're going to fleck at the bark and pick out those larvae. And you can see the, it's called woodpecker flecking, or also called blonding. And it creates this blonde look up the trunk of the tree. It's really easy to spot in the winter when there aren't any leaves. And it also tends to be, I've noticed, on one side of the tree, often, a sunny side of the tree, that the larvae are noticed first. You're also gonna be able to see some canopy thinning, but I also have noticed that woodpecker flecking comes first, and then once the tree is more infested, that's when you really start to notice the canopy thinning. The bark might split when those larvae are really building in numbers underneath the bark and disrupting that water nutrients flow. You're going to get sprouting, like I mentioned. This is called epicormic branching or epicormic sprouting. There are dormant buds on all trees down the trunk of the tree. And when they're stressed or sometimes exposed to a lot of light, trees will respond by activating those buds and sending out branches. But this is not a healthy response. Most trees, the healthy response is for the upper canopy branches to elongate and add foliage, not to start sprouting from the base of the tree. And then there's also the D-shaped exit holes. These are pretty hard to spot, and they can get easily disrupted by the woodpecker flecking. But when a tree is infested with enough larvae, they are noticeable. And then if you have suspicions, or sometimes when we're called out to check on a tree, one of the best ways for us to identify it without genetically identifying the larva is to scrape off some of the outer bark using a draw knife and see these S-shaped galleries. So native borers that are in the area and infest these trees don't make these telltale S-shaped galleries. They're more meandering, or they make sort of different patterns under the bark. So emerald ash borer leaves this sign here. And then you can also often find larvae in these galleries. So if you have a tree that you suspect is infested with emerald ash borer, we have a page on VT Invasives, or the Vermont Invasives website. You can go to get involved, report, and then reporting invasive insect. You can also, that's going to ask for some information there. You can also just email your local county forester with some pictures and a description. Pictures are really helpful when we're identifying emerald ash borer, especially if you can take pictures of some of those signs that are some of those like telltale signs. And then I mentioned this before also, but emerald ash borer, it spreads either with the larva moving, or the beetles moving 1 to 2 miles a year, or most often, we notice that it has spread throughout the state in the last, it was first found in Vermont in 2018. It has spread by moving firewood, so that 30 to 65 miles an hour with firewood in the back of a truck moving down the highway between a camp and a home site or from out of state. That's how we've noticed the infestation really spreading, because we've noticed, when I get to the map, that it is showing up in these random spots, and those are now really starting to fill in. So here's the map. The current emerald ash borer spread in Vermont, I pulled this map off the website today, is pretty crowded. When this map was first started, you would get, it's a heat map. And so there's an infestation, a tree, it could be several trees, but even just one tree found with emerald ash borer in it. And then there's a 2 mile, I should know this, but radius around it. I believe it's 2 miles. And then as more and more emerald ash borer are found in that area, the sort of heat, so to speak, intensifies in that area and radiates out. So it started in Orange, Vermont, and that was the first place. So that's why there's a really hot red spot right on Orange, and it has radiated out from there. And most of these bubbles, these individual trees that have been found, or groups of trees, have now merged, and we're seeing this, most of the state covered by these areas do not all have emerald ash borer. Not every tree in, colored with the yellow has emerald ash borer in those ash trees, but the chances of emerald ash borer being in those trees is pretty high, given the timeline of when we usually are able to detect or actually find the larva, because it does take some time for it to build in the tree and for us to notice. So this invasion wave, I had to also adjust from last year, adjust the timeline and where we are with the arrow. So emerald ash borer has been in the state since 2018, and we are starting to really hit the point of the curve where we're seeing that exponential increase in ash mortality and stressed ash trees. Excuse me. So it's becoming a lot more noticeable. It's been here for a while, but we're really I'm starting to see it when I'm walking around in the woods, when I'm driving around, when I'm talking to landowners, really starting to notice that trees are starting to die or show a lot of those signs of emerald ash borer infestation, or the stress that causes the tree to undergo. So we're going to keep seeing ash mortality. And you can also see from this graph that the EAB density in the area is not, it lags, or the ash mortality, I guess I should say, lags behind the emerald ash borer density. So as the density is increasing, I'm sorry, and we're going to see that delayed response in mortality. There we go. Okay. So now we get to talk about, of all the ash trees in Vermont, so ash makes up about 5% of all the trees in Vermont, which sounds like a small amount, but we have pretty high species diversity in Vermont. And where ash is found, it's often found in much higher percentages. So we will see, it's not uncommon to see stands have, ash, but it's also not uncommon to see stands that have 30% ash, and where it's black ash, it's even closer to maybe like 80 or 90% ash. So we have all these ash trees in Vermont, and they are all in different areas, spread across the state. So we have ash trees that are on public lands, ash trees that are on municipalities, which is kind of public land, and then we have ash trees that are on private land owned by private landowners and homeowners. So when we think about how to manage ash and how to approach the huge population of ash that are about to die based on our predictions, evidence from other states that have already been several years to even 10 or 20, well, I guess 10 years ahead of us in infestation waves, we know that most of the ash are going to die. It's about 1% that are not have some genetic resistance to emerald ash borer, but 99% of trees is a lot of trees. So all of these trees, we want to think about how to manage them on, when they're going to die, and how to weather the storm of this invasive pest. So we have, on public lands, we have trees that are around parks and trails and public spaces. And then we also have trees that are in, deep in interior forests. And some of those are managed and some of those are unmanaged forests. Then we have trees on municipalities, so like around roads, and then in parks and village centers, and then in town forests. Again, some of those town forests are managed, some of them are unmanaged, and then also within those town forests, some of those trees are along trails or around public spaces. And then we have trees that are on private lands, and those might be in forests, and again, those are managed or unmanaged. And then there are trees that are in yards, so shade trees around houses and buildings. And so sort of laying this all out, and then for private landowners, again, we have, like I went through this already, but there are trees that are on forests, and those are managed or unmanaged, and then in yards. And the decisions that we make about these trees are going to vary. So when you have a tree that is about to die, 99% chance that it's going to die, and it's right above a house, like in the picture behind here, your risk aversion might be pretty high, and you want to consider taking down that tree before it's dead, before it is maybe even before it's infested, or at those early signs of infestation, because those, there's such a high risk and a target there. When you have trees in a forest, if that forest is managed, or you're thinking about managing that forest, you have many other options. And I have another slide to sort of walk through some of those options. So questions? Sorry, I'm going to take another sip. Questions you might ask yourself as you wonder about the state of emerald ash borer in your area. It's in Heartland, it's in surrounding towns. Chances are it's not long. If it's not already in your trees, it's not going to be long before it's there. So, the responsible thing would be to start, making a plan and asking yourself some questions about, what do ash trees even look like? How do you know if you have ash trees on your property or not? What are your options? Where are your ash trees? So if you're in a forest, you might have one stand with a lot of ash trees. You might have only ash trees around your house. Those are, very different questions and very different decisions that you might be making about your ash trees. So where might these trees fall? If they're in the forest and they fall in the forest, is there a great need to do something? Maybe not. If you've invested a lot of time in managing your forest and growing those ash trees, maybe your decision changes a little bit because there is a lot of economic value in ash. So I'm just sort of, starting to lay out the complexity of making some decisions about what do we do next now that we know where it is and, that it's only increasing in intensity. So maybe you have ash, but you haven't seen any signs of emerald ash borer. Sorry, you might want to know where is the nearest infestation. You might be able to drive around town and see some infested trees and see how close to your property it is. And then thinking about your, timeline, your resources, who needs to be contacted, how will the work get done, what is the best time of year to do that work. So all of these sort of questions to start asking yourself. So for forest landowners, as I mentioned, you want to deal with the or administer the current use program. So people with 25 acres or more of forest land that are actively managing their property, they have a whole nother set of things to think about other than just like, is there an ash tree over my house? But how do you plan on managing your forest in the face of emerald ash borer? So review your management plan and walk through your woods and see where do you have ash. You can look through your management plan, and in the summary of each stand, there's a breakdown of the species composition. So you can see, what percentage of ash might you have in your forest stands and which stands have a lot of ash. If you do have ash, the next question is wondering, how mature it is. So emerald ash borer does not initially attack or infest very young trees. So, small pole-sized trees are not their main target, but they will eventually infest those, not nearly at the same rate as mature older trees. So if you have ash, wondering, that species composition is great because it'll tell you the percentage of ash, but then, wondering next step, is it large saw timber size, or is it, immature, small pole size stuff? Stay aware. You want to get out in your woods and check your trees for signs. Contact your consulting forester and ask them if you're unable to get out in your woods and check. And then also decide, based on your management plan and your goals, reflecting on your goals now, what are your goals for your forest? Are your goals economic goals? And so that ash that's really valuable and about to be or is infested with emerald ash borer, is that something you want to harvest before it is, before the value of that ash declines with the infestation? Or is it, are you going for some more like old growth characteristics in your forest, and maybe some large dead wood is not counter to your goals for that property? So really, reflecting on what your goals are and what's reflected in your management plan. So another thing to think about is what will happen when your ash trees die. So once infested, your trees are going to die over a period of about 3 to 5 years. That's back to that sort of infestation curve. And most ash trees are going to be, once infested, are going to be dead in 9 years. The space that the tree occupied in the forest will become available to other trees and plants. That sunlight that tree, that the footprint of the tree. And so there's, benefits and drawbacks to that. Any economic, I mentioned this kind of, any economic value of the tree will be lost quickly after the initial infestation. And then, as the trees die, they will become brittle and shed branches. Trees that die, they become snags, coarse woody material, but they also, so they, they're good for wildlife, but they're also potentially dangerous if you have trails on your property. And then, we know that about 1%, less than 1% of trees will survive. So there is some gambling there, whether your tree will be one of those. And then we also know that even after the overstory ash dies, we will continue to have young ash seedlings that continue to grow. And some of those, if you have a genetically resistant tree, some of those genetics will be from that tree. But you also will have genetics from trees that are infested and likely to become infested again. We have no way of preventing emerald ash borer from moving across our landscape. We also don't have any prevention from it returning on other waves once it's gone through and sort of attacked most of the large overstory trees. There's likely to be other waves of infestation. And so long-term goals for forest management and emerald ash borer, there are lots of goals that landowners have. And so there is a diversity of options for landowners to take when they are considering management and emerald ash borer. On a whole and as a conservation measure, we would like to maintain ash as a component of the forest as best we can. We know that this is not going to look the same as it has prior to emerald ash borer, but that doesn't mean that we want to completely eliminate ash and sort of freak out and harvest all the ash, because we never know what ash will be genetically resistant if we don't have some ash left on the landscape. We also want to retain ash for as long as possible on the landscape. We don't want to prematurely remove ash. And so then there's also the pairing with implementing silvicultural techniques in a forest setting. So we might recruit some ash, so those young ash that might live through subsequent waves, or there is some work being done with biological controls. There's a few wasp species that are being released. They are very host specific, so that means that they are only feeding on emerald ash borer larvae, and they can't be released prematurely. So the emerald ash borer has to be in the area, and then we can release biological controls. And there is some hope that eventually, after a rocky road ahead, we will have some equilibrium between the biocontrol wasps that are eating the emerald ash borer larvae and allowing some, keeping that population of emerald ash borer low enough that we're able to grow some ash trees and have ash trees on our landscape and not completely losing the species from Vermont. So that's the sort of implementing silvicultural techniques to solicit ash recruitment. There's some hope that if we grow some ash now, that those ash will grow up in an environment where there's more of a balance with emerald ash borer and the populations are kept low enough. And then another option is also to manage ash trees in a stand as ghost trees, meaning you don't count the space they take up because you don't want to reduce the density of your forest prematurely if we know that most of those ash trees will likely die. And so just keeping it in mind, if those ash are not being harvested, that the density of the stand does not drop too low and invite things like invasive plants or just counter your goals for that management. So moving to the next column, we want to promote a diversity of native species. So we want to retain diversity in our forests. We know that the diversity is going to be lessened some with most ash gone, but that means we don't know what the next invasive is going to be, and we don't know what trees are going to be the most stressed by different environmental conditions. And so if we have diversity, we're able to sort of not put all our eggs in one basket and have options. And so one thing that is really important with emerald ash borer killing a lot of ash is to make sure that we're managing invasive plants and that they're not the thing filling in the canopy gaps when ash dies off our landscape. And so really controlling invasives is a very important measure when we have native species dropping out of the mix because of an invasive pest. And then there's also this idea of conserving the economic value of ash. Ash is a very valuable tree economically. And so you want to make sure that you're not prematurely harvesting ash because there's a lot of value in that. So getting the timing right is really tricky. This is where you really want to work with your consulting forester and have a plan, not, don't be trying to make a plan at the 11th hour because it might be hard to, really conserve that economic value. You want to release ash trees to increase growth if you think you do have time to keep growing those trees. And then you want to also consider reducing your diameter objective. So how big are you going to grow those ash trees if you're feeling like maybe you don't have time, or maybe not feeling, but knowing that, emerald ash borer is already on the property. Maybe you're going to reduce those diameter objectives and try to grow other species longer. So emerald ash borer, like many insects, has a period of time when it is moving around the landscape naturally, on its own wings, and a time when it's dormant and sort of staying in the trees or, cold weather. So we want to make sure that even though ash is, like if we go back to that map, emerald ash borer has covered most of the state. We don't want to be moving firewood infested with emerald ash borer or trees infested with emerald ash borer in the flight period. So when the larvae are going to be exiting those trees, or the larvae are going, or the beetles are going to be moving around and moving it to other places that don't have emerald ash borer yet. And so we want to harvest and transport ash during the non-flight period, ideally. So that's October 1st through April 30th. So we're in that window now. Winter harvests work really well for this, to stay within this window. And there's other options also to utilize markets that treat products. They chip the low-grade wood, or just leaving it on site is another really great option if you think you have emerald ash borer, and those tops might have some, the small wood at the top might have some larvae in there. Instead of trying to, get every last piece of that for firewood and moving it to your camp across the state or something like that, just leave it on site, and you're not going to be moving that around. And then we have some resources for thinking not just for private landowners but also for municipalities about what we need to be thinking about with emerald ash borer, what trees are in right-of-ways, what trees need to be inventoried or cut to protect people moving around. So Vermont Community Forestry has a great set of resources, and they're really, they've done a lot of great work to help towns, Heartland included, in doing tree inventories and assessing which trees are at most risk and what areas have the highest density of ash. And then VT Invasives is also a great website for not only this invasive pest, but all invasives. And anytime you're questioning, do I have this invasive, or am I seeing this right? You can always submit that, report it, and get to somebody that is able to help you identify whether you have emerald ash borer or whether you have something else on your property. And now questions.
So if anybody has questions, just go ahead and put those in the chat. I'll be able to see those and read them out. So thank you, Hannah, very much.
Information overload. So I ran through that pretty quick.
I do have the chat open and I'm not seeing any questions. I might be able to go to the gallery. Message everyone. I think I would see them.
Stop sharing also. Where do the EABs enter the tree? I see one chat.
Okay.
So emerald ash borer, they enter the tree. The adult female beetle has an ovipositor that is piercing through the bark and depositing them under the bark layer in the cambium layer of the tree. That's how they get in there. And then I see another that says, I arrived a little late. What are the signs of infestation? So I can go back to my slides. Let's see. Share
and I want to remind everybody that this presentation will be available on the town YouTube site, and we will be posting a link both on the listserv and on the town website on the Conservation Commission page. So if you did miss any of this, or you want to refresh your memory in the future, you can always go to follow those links and both see and hear it all again.
Yeah, I'll run through them quick and then go back for details, I guess. So signs, woodpecker flecking is a really sure tell way to see if emerald ash borer is in a tree, because the woodpeckers know before we do. And then eventually you get some canopy thinning as the tree is more and more stressed. That canopy thinning is also, I'll skip ahead, is paired with this epicormic branching. So as the upper canopy is sort of shrinking back, you're getting a secondary stress response of having the epicormic branching sort of sprouting out. And so you get a very odd shaped looking tree. So you look up, the canopy is thin, but you also, somewhere along that tree, you're getting like these tufts of branches. And then bark splitting is another sign. And then under the bark, you'll get these, sorry, I'm skipping around a little. I should reorganize these slides. Should get some you'll get S-shaped galleries from the larva, chewing their way through that cambium layer. And eventually when those larvae are pupating, you get D-shaped exit holes from the adults leaving, and exiting out of the bark there.
And you mentioned blonding before as well.
Yeah, that's that, the woodpecker flecking or blonding. Yeah, that blonde look on the trees. See any other?
Is it true that cutting a fully infested tree can be dangerous?
Yeah, that's a really great one. Thank you for asking that. So when ash trees become very brittle when they're not thriving and alive. And so as the infestation builds in that tree and it's more and more stressed and, closer to dying, ash trees get very brittle. And so that's one of the reasons, if you start looking around the woods, you'll notice that there aren't many standing dead ash trees, because once they die, they tend to fall over and then they rot pretty quickly on the ground. So yes, when it's infested, they can be dangerous. That's why it's important to, catch that early on, or even, if you have emerald ash borer, even in your town, get the trees cut, that are hanging over your house before, while they're healthy, because you're going to have a lot, whoever is cutting it, whether it's you as a landowner or you're hiring an arborist or somebody, they're going to have a much easier time cutting a live ash tree that is sound, and, directionally felling it and dealing with that tree than if it is compromised.
There were two follow-ups to earlier questions. One was, where do they enter the tree? And the follow-up was the bottom of the tree.
So they enter the tree, they start in the upper canopy and work their way down. So those adults are starting off sort of munching on leaves, which is a pretty minimal impact to the tree, but munching on leaves and depositing in the upper branches. And then as that infestation builds in that tree, they will move down all the way to the ground in that tree.
Great. And the other follow-up was about identification, was a question about the appearance of the beetles, which you had that slide. So I don't know if you want to just show that again. What does the beetle look like?
Oh, what does the beetle look like? Yes, sure. Let's see. So I'll go back to the beginning. So the beetle is this one that's circled here. That's an emerald ash borer. It has some lookalikes, but it's about 1/2 inch long and very, very, very green, emerald green. So if you get the size of it right in that shape, then there aren't too many things that you really confuse it with. And I'll put a plug in also if anybody is trying to identify beetles or really anything. There's an app called the Seek app, SEEK. That's a really great app for identifying any living thing. I use it all the time when I'm out in the woods, and I have a neighbor that just recently identified an emerald ash borer that was on their screen, their door screen this fall, and it accurately identified the emerald ash borer.
Wow.
So.
Another question, what's wrong with burning dead ash?
Nothing.
That's right. I mean, we remember as kids never to burn Dutch elm.
Huh.
I seem to remember that would spread the disease, but this is not the way
I see. Yeah. I will mention that the BTUs in ash also, along with the sort of wood integrity, the heat value in the wood greatly is diminished once it is dead. So there's nothing wrong with burning it. You won't get as warm from burning it. It gets pretty powdery and sort of punky quickly.
It makes stacking it a little bit less strenuous, but
yes. But your time might be better stacking something else that's actually going to keep you warm.
All right.
Anything else?
Are there any other questions? Well, Hannah, thank you so much. I think that This was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for giving us your time again and sharing it with our community. And once again, folks, the links, we'll put it on the listserv and it will be there on the town website. And you can use those resources. And I think if there are no other questions, I will wrap this up for everyone. Thank you, Hannah, so much once again.
Yes, thank you for having me. And if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out to me, or, follow up with anybody on the Heartland Conservation Commission. They know how to get a hold of me.
Super.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you.